The heritage of a click. There's a photo on my nightstand. It's an old faded picture of my mum and dad, the ones who raised me. I love them with my whole heart. But for 34 years, a silent question has haunted me. Who am I really? I've always known I was adopted. It was never a secret, just a fact of my life, a detail on a birth certificate. But a part of me always felt like a story without a beginning, a book missing its first chapter. That feeling led me down a digital rabbit hole, a late-night search on Google that landed me on Ancestry.com. I bought a kit, spit into a tube, and mailed a part of myself to a lab I'd never heard of. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe just a percentage breakdown. A little Irish, a little German, something to fill in the blank. I certainly wasn't expecting to find names. One quiet Tuesday night, my phone buzzed with an email. Your DNA results are in. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the app, my hands shaking. The page loaded and there it was. Not just percentages, but names. A list of possible relatives. And at the very top, 2 names I'd never seen before. 2 names that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. Michael Lewis and Sarah Miller. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. These weren't just names on a page. They were the answers I'd been searching for my entire life. They were my beginning, my first chapter. In that moment, a lifelong mystery began to unravel, all because of a single click. And that's where our story begins. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and state in the comments below. Let's see how far this story reaches. The starting point. Daniel's life was a masterclass in quiet contentment. At 34, he had a stable job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and a group of friends who were more like family. He spent his weekends hiking the trails of the Pacific Northwest or tinkering with vintage motorcycles in his garage. His parents, who had adopted him as a baby, were retired and living in Arizona, but they talked on the phone almost every Sunday. He loved them fiercely, a bond forged not by blood, but by decades of unconditional love and shared history. He wasn't searching for a missing piece of himself. He didn't feel broken or incomplete, but a persistent, low-level curiosity had always hummed in the background of his life. It wasn't a void to be filled, but a question to be answered. Where did I come from? He'd catch a glimpse of himself in the mirror and wonder about the origin of his deep-set hazel eyes or the slight curve in his nose. His parents had given him everything, but they couldn't give him that. The question was a quiet passenger, never demanding attention, but always there. Then, a commercial for Ancestry.com popped up on his TV one night. "Find your roots," the voiceover said. He had seen it 100 times before, but this time it felt different. It felt like an invitation. He pulled out his laptop and typed in the website address. It was all so simple. Order a kit. A few clicks, a credit card number, and 2 days later, a small box arrived on his doorstep. Inside was a plastic tube, instructions, and a return label. The act of spitting into the tube felt momentous, almost ceremonial. He was literally sending a piece of himself out into the unknown, a silent request to the universe for answers. He sealed the box, dropped it off at the post office, and watched the truck drive away. And then came the waiting. The "Your DNA kit has been received" email was followed by the "Your sample is being processed" email. The anticipation was a low, steady hum, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a kid waiting for Christmas morning. Every day he checked his email, refreshing the page with a mix of impatience and dread. What if they found something he didn't want to know? What if they found nothing at all? He tried to go about his life as normal. He worked on a new logo design for a local brewery. He went for a run along the Willamette River. He met his friends for a Blazers game. But the thought was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. It was a silent countdown. One Tuesday evening, after a long day of staring at a computer screen, he sat down to eat a takeout burrito. His phone, lying face down on the coffee table, buzzed. It was a notification from Ancestry.com. The subject line was short and to the point. "Your DNA results are ready." The burrito suddenly felt heavy in his hands. He put it down, his heart thumping in his chest. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. He reached for his phone, his hand trembling slightly, and stared at the glowing screen. The revelation. The forgotten burrito lay cold on the coffee table. All Daniel's attention was on the glowing screen in his hand. The notification stared back at him, a digital crossroads between the life he knew and the one he was about to discover. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he took a deep, steadying breath, a small ritual of mental preparation. What was he about to see? A list of 1,000 people he didn't know? A dead end? Or the very beginning of his own story? With a trembling thumb, he tapped the screen. The Ancestry.com app opened. A loading circle spun for what felt like an eternity, each rotation tightening the knot in his stomach. The silence in the room was deafening, amplifying the thud of his own heartbeat. And then, the page loaded. The first thing he saw was a vibrant map of the world, dotted with color. The words ethnicity estimate were bold at the top. His eyes quickly scanned the list below. 45% German and Western European, 28% Scandinavian, 15% Irish. The rest was a scatter of other regions he'd never considered. A small, involuntary smile touched his lips. He finally had an answer. The quiet passenger that had ridden with him for so long now had a name and a place of origin. He wasn't just a person, he was a mosaic of places, a small part of a larger ancient history, but the real discovery was yet to come. He scrolled down past the map, his gaze falling on the next section header, DNA matches. His breath hitched. The screen presented a list of names, each with a small thumbnail and a degree of relationship. The first few were distant relatives, a third cousin here, a fourth cousin there. These were names he didn't know, faces he didn't recognize. He scrolled quickly, his heart rate climbing, searching for something more. And then his eyes locked on it. The screen refreshed, pulling a new set of matches to the top. Two names stood out, positioned prominently under the label Close Matches. The first was Michael Lewis. The page listed him as possible father. Below his name was a grainy profile photo. An older man, maybe in his mid-50s, with a gentle smile and eyes that were impossibly familiar. It was like looking at a future version of himself. The second name was just below the first, Sarah Miller. She was listed as possible mother. Her photo was a little clearer. A woman with a kind face, a soft smile, and a scattering of freckles. Daniel's breath hitched again. He saw his own eyes in her photo, a haunting, visceral connection that transcended any simple resemblance. A wave of emotions hit him all at once. Shock, disbelief, a flood of gratitude, and an overwhelming surge of pure, unfiltered hope. He wasn't a book without a beginning anymore. The mystery had a name, two names. He clicked on Michael's profile. The page listed their shared family tree, a digital map that finally connected him to a past he'd never known. He saw grandparents he never met, aunts and uncles he never knew existed. He clicked on Sarah's profile and saw the same. Her page revealed a shared love for gardening, a hobby Daniel had always had but never understood where it came from. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just fitting, they were snapping into place with a sudden beautiful clarity. He stared at the names for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing in on him. He could simply stop here. He could have his answer, these two names, and let the mystery remain a comfortable, distant truth. But the thought was fleeting. He had to know more. He had to talk to them. With a newfound purpose, he navigated to the private messaging feature on the website. His hands still trembled, but this time it was with resolve. He typed, then erased, then typed again. How do you start a conversation like this? Hello, stranger, you're my dad. He settled on a simple, direct approach, words straight from the heart. Hi, Michael. My name is Daniel. According to our DNA match on Ancestry, we may be related. I was adopted as a baby, and I'm hoping to connect with my birth parents. If you're open to it, I'd love to talk. He reread it a dozen times, each word a step into a new world. He sent a similar message to Sarah. With a final shaking breath, he hit the send button. The screen flashed message sent. He put the phone down on the table next to his cold burrito, the night silent once more. But this time, the silence was filled with an entirely new kind of anticipation. He had just sent the first message on a journey he could never have imagined. The first connection. The hours that followed felt like days. The digital silence was a heavy, constant presence. Daniel's phone became an extension of his hand, a source of both hope and anxiety. He'd set it on the counter, only to pick it up a minute later, checking for a new message. He'd opened the Ancestry app, refreshing his inbox, even though he knew he would get a push notification. Each unread message from a friend, each spam email, felt like a cruel trick. The world was moving on, oblivious to the fact that his was on hold. He tried to work, but his design software felt like a foreign language. He tried to watch TV, but the plot lines blurred together. Every sound, every vibration, every flicker of light from his phone sent a jolt through his body. The initial flood of hope was now a slow, nagging current of doubt. What if they didn't want to talk? What if they were upset by his message? Maybe he had been too direct. Maybe he had been too vague. He reread the message he sent a dozen times, scrutinizing every word. It felt polite, honest. But what if they just thought he was a scammer? He knew he was walking a thin line between respectful curiosity and an intrusion into their lives. The fear of rejection was a cold, sharp feeling, one he hadn't prepared for. 2 days passed in this state of purgatory. Tuesday turned into Wednesday, and Wednesday bled into Thursday. The anticipation hadn't faded. It had hardened into a quiet, resigned dread. He had almost convinced himself that this was the end of the road. The names were the answer, and that was all he was meant to get. He'd gone on a long run along the river, trying to sweat out the nervous energy. He'd just gotten back, throwing his keys on the counter, when his phone, still sitting face down, began to vibrate. It was a call. The number was unfamiliar. The area code, however, made him pause. It was from Idaho. Michael Lewis's profile said he lived in Boise. His heart jumped into his throat. He stared at the screen for a moment, the vibrations a frantic rhythm in the silent room. He took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" he said, his voice a little more breathless than he intended. A moment of silence on the other end, then a shaky, cautious voice spoke. "Hi, is this Daniel?" The world seemed to stop. The voice was older, rough around the edges, but kind. It held a subtle tremor, not of fear, but of profound emotion. It was the voice of a man who was as nervous as he was. "Yes, this is Daniel," he managed. "Are you Michael?" "Yes, son, it's me," the voice said, the tremor now more pronounced. The word son hit Daniel with a force that made him sit down. It was a word he had heard a million times, but never like this. Not from this voice. Michael explained that he had seen the message and had to read it a few times to make sure it was real. He talked about how he had always wondered what happened to the baby he and Sarah had to give up. He told Daniel that it had been a hard decision, a choice that had haunted them both for decades. He told him that he looked for him once, but the records were sealed. It was a raw, honest conversation, filled with pauses and quiet moments. Michael's voice was full of a lifetime of regret and longing. After a few minutes of talking, Michael said, "Sarah and I would love to meet you, if you're open to it. There's so much we want to tell you, so much we've been waiting to say." Daniel's mind was a whirlwind. Meet? This was happening faster than he had ever imagined. His body was still shaking from the initial phone call, but a new, powerful feeling was taking over. It was a sense of coming home. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice now steady and firm. More than anything. They agreed to meet for coffee the following Saturday. A neutral place, a local diner, a few blocks from Daniel's apartment. As they hung up, Daniel's hand remained on the phone, still warm from the call. He sat there staring at the wall, a mixture of shock and elation washing over him. The waiting was over. The names on the screen were no longer just data. They were real people. The voice he just heard was a link in a chain he never knew existed. He wasn't alone on this journey. He was about to meet the very first connection to his past. The diner meeting, Saturday morning, arrived with a clear, crisp quality that seemed to perfectly match the nervous energy buzzing through Daniel's veins. He chose his outfit with a care he usually reserved for job interviews, a clean pressed button-down shirt and a pair of jeans. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. He wanted to look like himself, but also like someone you could trust. The diner they had chosen was a classic mom-and-pop spot, the kind with red vinyl booths and the faint smell of coffee and griddle grease. He arrived 10 minutes early, a self-conscious habit of a man trying to control a situation he had no control over. He sat in a booth by the window, his back to the door, watching the street, half expecting his life to change right in front of him. Then, a shadow fell across his table. He looked up. Standing there was a man with a head of graying hair, a kind face etched with the lines of age and worry, and, most strikingly, a pair of hazel eyes that were his exact match. Michael Lewis, the man from the profile picture. He was taller than Daniel expected, and his shoulders were a little stooped, as if they carried a weight he'd been bearing for a long time. They just stood there for a moment, two strangers looking at a familiar face. A nervous smile broke across Michael's face. "Daniel?" he asked, his voice still holding that familiar tremor. "Michael," Daniel replied, the name feeling foreign and right all at once. They shook hands, a firm, awkward grip that conveyed years of unspoken history. Michael slid into the opposite side of the booth, and the silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a lifetime of unasked questions. A waitress approached, and they both reflexively ordered coffee, a small shared action that seemed to break the ice. I still can't quite believe this is real, Michael said, his eyes scanning Daniel's face. You have your mother's nose, and your smile. Daniel felt his throat tighten. It was the first time someone had ever pointed out a physical trait of his that came from his biological parents. It was a simple observation, but it was a bridge across the chasm of his unknown past. Michael began to talk, his voice a low, steady rumble as he recounted their story. He and Sarah were high school sweethearts. They were in love, full of youthful dreams, but they were just kids. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, a wave of panic and fear had washed over their families. They were from working-class homes. A baby would mean the end of college dreams, of any chance at a better life. Their parents, pragmatic and loving in their own way, had encouraged them to consider adoption. It was a decision that was made not out of a lack of love, but an overwhelming abundance of it. They believed it was the only way to give him a life with more opportunities than they could ever provide. Michael's voice cracked as he spoke about that time, the grief still raw beneath the surface. We drove you to the adoption agency ourselves, he said, his eyes distant. Sarah cried the whole way home. We stayed together for a few years after that, but the ghost of that decision was always between us. We eventually went our separate ways. He paused, looking down at his coffee cup. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you. I've always wondered what kind of person you became. Daniel listened, his heart aching for the two teenagers in Michael's story. He saw no blame in their choices, only a profound, heartbreaking love. He told Michael about his own life, about his parents, and how they had given him everything. He reassured him that he had a wonderful life, full of love and happiness. A sense of peace began to settle over the booth. The silence was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the warmth of a new connection. They were no longer strangers. They were family. Michael's expression suddenly brightened, a hesitant smile spreading across his face. He leaned forward. You know, I told Sarah I was meeting you, he said, and she's been waiting for this moment. She'd love to see you too, Daniel, if you're ready. The news was both expected and overwhelming. Daniel had hoped for this, but hearing it from Michael made it real. The first chapter of his life had just been written, and he was already being invited to start the second. He didn't hesitate. Yes, I'm ready, he said, and for the first time in his life he truly felt like a complete person. The reunion with a mother. The second meeting was a different kind of nerve-wracking. Michael and Daniel had agreed to meet at a small park near Sarah's home, a serene place with an old gazebo and benches under sprawling oak trees. The air was a little colder than it had been on Saturday, a sharp breeze rustling the fallen leaves. As Daniel walked toward the gazebo, he saw Michael first, standing next to a woman whose back was to him. He knew immediately it was her, Sarah. She was a little shorter than he expected, her posture graceful, her hair a warm, silver-streaked brown. He felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. Michael turned, saw Daniel, and then gently touched Sarah's arm. She turned around. The woman in the profile picture was standing there in the flesh. Her eyes, those same hazel eyes he saw in his own reflection, widened as she took him in. For a long, silent moment, they just stared at each other. Daniel saw every emotion flicker across her face. Shock, disbelief, a profound, aching grief, and then an overwhelming surge of love that seemed to melt away all the years between them. Sarah took a shaky step forward, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. Daniel, she whispered, the name a fragile thread in the silent air. And then she was moving, not walking but almost running. She wrapped her arms around him, a tight, desperate embrace that pulled him close. It wasn't just a hug, it was a physical manifestation of a lifetime of longing and regret. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with sobs. Daniel, who had always been a rock-steady, composed person, felt his own eyes well up. He held her just as tightly, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts. This was the woman who gave him life. This was the warmth he had unknowingly craved for so long. After a few minutes, she pulled back, still holding his arms, her gaze fixed on his face, as if she were trying to memorize every detail. You have your father's eyebrows, she said through her tears, a small laugh breaking through her sobs. And your grandfather's smile. I can't believe it's really you. They found a bench and sat down, Michael a quiet, comforting presence by their side. Sarah took Daniel's hand, her touch surprisingly warm and strong. She began to tell her story, a more personal and intimate version than Michael's. She spoke of the fear, the shame she felt as a teenage girl and the social pressure of the time, but she also spoke of the deep love she had for him even before he was born. "We just couldn't keep you," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "It was the hardest decision of our lives, but we wanted you to have a life with a loving family, a family that could give you everything you deserved. We signed the papers, but every day for a year, I looked out my window, hoping you were coming back. I knew it was foolish, but a part of me always hoped." She recounted how she had bought him a small blue teddy bear before he was born, a little keepsake she put in the box with the adoption papers. "I was so scared it would be a bad life for you, but I hoped every single day that you found a good family, a family that loved you." She then reached into her purse and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. "I wrote you this letter the day we said goodbye. I always thought maybe someday I could give it to you." Daniel took the letter, his heart pounding in his chest. It was old, the ink faded, the creases worn from years of being folded and refolded. In that moment, a profound and undeniable truth settled over him. His parents hadn't abandoned him, they had chosen him. Their decision was an act of immeasurable love, a sacrifice made for his future happiness. They had endured decades of pain and silence, all so he could have a better life. The gap he had always felt inside wasn't an empty space caused by abandonment. It was a space filled with a deep, silent love he had only just discovered. The mystery was not a void of answers. It was a testament to love's enduring power. The journey to find them had been a journey to understand himself, to realize that his story wasn't one of being given up, but one of being profoundly, truly loved. The past unveiled. The letter from Sarah was the key that unlocked the past. Folded inside a faded envelope, its contents were a mirror into a world Daniel had only ever imagined. The next weekend, Michael and Sarah invited him to their homes, a separate but shared experience that would fill in the missing chapters of his life. First, he went to Sarah's house. It was a charming two-story home with a sprawling backyard filled with vibrant flowers and a vegetable garden that explained her love for gardening. Inside, the house was a gallery of memories. On the walls were photos of a younger Sarah, her hair long and her eyes full of youthful dreams. She pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed with time. "This is us in high school," she said, her finger tracing a picture of her and a young Michael, both smiling shyly at the camera. Daniel saw the unburdened joy in their faces, the innocence of a love story before it was marked by a difficult choice. She showed him pictures of her family, and for the first time, he saw the faces of his grandparents and his aunts and uncles. He saw a picture of a little boy who looked so much like him, and Sarah explained that he was her brother, his uncle, and now Daniel's uncle. The most powerful moment came when she led him to a small wooden box on her dresser. Inside, nestled on a soft velvet cloth, was the blue teddy bear she had mentioned. "This was yours," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel picked it up, feeling the worn fabric and imagining the tiny hands that might have held it decades ago. It was a tangible connection, a piece of his past he could hold in his hands. Later that same day, he visited Michael. His home was smaller, a comfortable bachelor pad filled with old records and a workshop in the back. Michael showed him an old scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings and ticket stubs from concerts they had attended. He spoke about his passion for working with his hands and how he used to build model airplanes, a hobby that explained Daniel's own natural talent for design. He showed him a picture of the old pickup truck he and Sarah used to drive, and for a moment, Daniel could almost see them, two teenagers on the road to a future they couldn't have predicted. They drove through the small town where they had grown up, a town that felt frozen in time. Michael pointed out the old movie theater where they had their first date and the ice cream shop where they had their first kiss. He showed him the house where Sarah grew up and the small, modest home where he lived. They drove past the old high school, a brick building with a football field where Michael had once played. It was a small, ordinary town, but through Michael's stories, it was filled with a rich personal history that now belonged to Daniel too. The culmination of the day's discoveries was a small, dusty box Michael gave him. "This was Sarah's," he said. "She gave it to me when we said goodbye. It has some things I think you should have." Inside, among a few dried flowers and an old photograph of a young Michael and Sarah, was a small journal. It was Sarah's. The first few pages were filled with typical teenage entries, but then the entries became more frantic, more emotional. They were the private thoughts and fears of a young girl facing an impossible choice. Daniel sat in his car, parked on a quiet street, and opened the journal. The pages were a raw, honest account of her pregnancy. The final entry was dated the day she gave him up. "My sweet baby boy," she had written, "your father and I love you more than words can say. We are doing this because we want you to have a life full of love, a life we can't give you right now. I hope one day you understand. I hope you find this journal and know that not a day will go by that I don't think of you. You are a part of my soul. Goodbye, my little love." A tear slid down Daniel's face. The past wasn't just a collection of facts, it was a living, breathing story of love and sacrifice. He wasn't just a person who had been adopted. He was the product of a powerful love story, a story that was now finally complete. The journey of self-discovery. The discoveries from the previous weekend settled over Daniel like a warm, familiar blanket. The photos, the journal, the stories, they weren't just facts about two people he had just met. They were clues to his own identity. The abstract question of "who am I?" was finally finding its answers in the details of Michael and Sarah's lives. He found himself looking at the world with new eyes. He went back to his workshop, the space where he spent hours meticulously restoring old motorcycles. He'd always loved the process, the way he could see a machine's potential beneath its rust and grime, but he never knew why. Then, a memory surfaced from his visit to Michael's house, a garage filled with old woodworking tools, the smell of sawdust, and a half-finished birdhouse on a workbench. Michael had mentioned how he loved working with his hands, how it was the only thing that could clear his mind. Daniel realized that his own passion for restoration wasn't a random hobby. It was a deep-seated connection to his father, a shared, silent language of creation. The same revelation came to him while he was working on a new design project. He had always been drawn to vibrant colors and organic shapes, often incorporating natural elements like leaves and flowers into his graphic design work. He just assumed it was his artistic style. But then he remembered Sarah's backyard, a riot of color and life, a meticulously planned garden that was her sanctuary. He remembered the love and care she put into every plant. He saw pictures of her in the garden, her face peaceful and content. Suddenly, his artistic instincts weren't just style, they were a part of his mother, a shared love for bringing beauty to life. This journey wasn't just about discovering his parents, it was about discovering himself. He started noticing the small, almost insignificant things, the way he unconsciously hummed old country songs while he worked. Michael had played the guitar in a small band in high school and had a love for classic country music, the way he folded his laundry in a specific, almost obsessive way. Sarah was a neat freak who organized everything from her spice rack to her photo albums. He wasn't just a person who had inherited some physical traits. He had inherited passions, quirks, and small private parts of their souls. The pieces of the puzzle were finally clicking into place. For the first time, his life felt whole. His love for his adoptive parents, the ones who had raised him with so much love and support, was not diminished. In fact, it was strengthened. They had given him his life, his opportunities, and a foundation of love that allowed him to be the person he was. Now his connection to his biological parents provided a deeper understanding of who that person was at his core. He wasn't a separate entity anymore. He was a perfect, seamless blend of both. One evening, he was sitting in his living room, surrounded by his world, the books on his shelf, the art on his walls, the tools in his garage. He picked up his phone and looked at the photos he had taken. A picture of Michael smiling, a picture of Sarah by her garden, a photo of the three of them standing together. The image was simple, but it was the most complete picture of himself he had ever seen. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't feel like he was just living. He felt like he was living his full story. He had two families, two histories, and a singular, unified identity. The quiet question that had followed him his whole life was finally gone. He wasn't just a person anymore. He was a son, a part of a past he had just found, and a part of a family that had always been waiting for him. The feeling was a profound sense of peace, as if he had finally come home to himself, the family who raised him. Daniel knew he couldn't keep this new part of his life a secret from the people who gave him everything. His parents, David and Carol, had loved and supported him without question for over 3 decades. Telling them about his biological parents felt like a huge emotional leap, but it was a leap he had to take. He flew home to Phoenix to tell them in person, wanting to see their faces and share this news in the same room. He found them on their back patio, where they spent most of their afternoons, sipping iced tea and listening to the soft hum of the Arizona desert. He sat down, the words catching in his throat. "Mum, Dad," he started, his voice a little shaky, "I have something to tell you. I took a DNA test a while back. He watched as his mother's smile softened, her eyes filled with an instant understanding. His father, David, placed his hand over his. They had always known this day might come, but hearing it out loud was different. Daniel told them the whole story, from the Ancestry.com click to the emotional reunions with Michael and Sarah. He spoke about the overwhelming rush of emotions, the joy of finally having answers, and the profound sadness for the journey his biological parents had to take. He was careful to emphasize that this discovery didn't change his love for them. "I have two families now, but you're still my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Nothing could ever change that. Carol reached across the table and held his hand. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice filled with a familiar, loving warmth. "We always knew this was a part of your story. We never saw this as a threat to us. We just wanted you to be happy and to find the answers you needed." David just nodded, his eyes glistening with pride and love. "It takes a lot of courage for them to do what they did," David added, his voice low. "And it takes a lot of courage for them to face it now. It sounds like you found two wonderful people." The conversation was filled with tears and hugs. They asked him a million questions about Michael and Sarah, and Daniel happily answered, showing them pictures. They were excited for him, and their love was so solid, so unshakable, that it made his new reality feel even more secure. A few weeks later, Daniel had an idea. It was a risky one, but it felt right. He wanted his two families to meet. He called Michael and Sarah and then David and Carol, and to his relief, everyone was on board. The four of them, each with their own history and their own set of emotions, agreed to a quiet dinner at Daniel's apartment in Portland. The evening was filled with a nervous energy that slowly dissipated into genuine warmth. Daniel's adoptive mother, Carol, gave Sarah a hug that spoke volumes. David and Michael, two men who had never met, found common ground in their shared love for Daniel and their mutual passion for vintage cars. They laughed at a shared joke, two fathers bonded by a son they both raised in different ways. As they sat around the dinner table sharing stories, Daniel looked at them, his two mothers, his two fathers. His heart felt so full it ached. He was the common thread, the living proof that a family could be built from love, from courage, from difficult choices, and from a single click on a computer screen. The love in the room was palpable, a testament to the fact that his new family hadn't replaced his old one. It had only made it larger, richer, and more complete. Two worlds, one life. The months that followed the dinner were a beautiful, messy, and exhilarating dance. Daniel's life, once a single steady narrative, had split into two rich and equally meaningful paths. He was no longer just a son to David and Carol, he was also a son to Michael and Sarah. And he found a way to be all of it at once. His calendar became a delicate balance of travel and togetherness. He'd spend one weekend in Portland, helping Michael in his garage, learning how to sand down old car parts and fix an engine with a patient, practiced hand. They didn't just work on cars, they talked about life, about what it was like to be a man, a father, and to find a peace you never thought you'd have. The next weekend, he might be at Sarah's house, getting his hands dirty in her garden, listening to her talk about the best time to plant tulips and the secret to growing perfect tomatoes. In those moments, he wasn't just learning about gardening, he was learning about patience, about nurturing something to life, a lesson his mother had known his entire life. He kept his Sunday phone calls with David and Carol, but now they were filled with new stories. They'd talk about Michael's work and Sarah's garden, and they'd ask questions about his biological parents with a genuine curiosity and kindness that moved him every time. The holiday season became an even bigger affair. He flew to Arizona for Thanksgiving with David and Carol, a familiar tradition filled with his mother's famous pecan pie and his father's booming laughter. And for Christmas, he traveled to Idaho, joining Michael and Sarah for a more intimate celebration, watching as they reconnected with a joy that had been missing for so long. His two worlds weren't just coexisting, they were intertwining. He'd find himself talking to David about a new technique he learned from Michael, or sharing a photo of a project he was working on with his biological parents. His life wasn't fractured, it was just bigger. The love hadn't been divided, it had been multiplied. One lazy Sunday afternoon, he was at home in his apartment, a place that used to feel like his solo sanctuary, but now felt like the center of a much larger universe. He was on a video call with both families, a regular occurrence now. On one side of the screen were David and Carol, sitting on their patio in the Arizona sun. On the other side were Michael and Sarah, nestled on a couch in their living room. They were all laughing, talking about something silly, and in that moment, Daniel looked from one side of the screen to the other. His parents, who had given him a life. His biological parents, who had given him answers. He saw the love and acceptance in their eyes, and a profound sense of peace washed over him. He was not just a product of two different stories, he was the bridge that brought them together. His life was full, complete, and exactly as it was meant to be. The journey to find himself had ended not with a choice between two families, but with the joy of gaining them both. Chapter 10. The End of the Mystery. Months turned into a year, and the beautiful, complex tapestry of Daniel's life continued to grow. The initial shock had long worn off, replaced by the warm, steady rhythm of a complete life. He no longer felt like a book with a missing first chapter. He felt like a well-read novel, its pages filled with love, loss, and the incredible journey of finding his true self. The small, quiet question that had once haunted him was now gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He often thought about the beginning of his journey, the late-night search, the hesitation before clicking the button, the anxious wait for the results. It had all started with a simple act, a single click on a website. At the time, he thought he was looking for names. He was looking for a biological father and mother. But what he found was something so much bigger. He found a piece of himself he never knew was missing. He learned that his love for old cars came from Michael's quiet passion for tinkering in the garage. He learned that his artistic eye for color and design was a reflection of Sarah's green thumb and her ability to bring life to a patch of dirt. He learned that his quick wit and sense of humor were a direct inheritance from both of them. He wasn't just a collection of traits. He was a perfect, beautiful blend of nature and nurture, a testament to the fact that blood can connect you to your past, but love is what truly builds a family. His life was no longer about filling a void. It was about appreciating the abundance he now had. He had two mothers who loved him with a fierce and unconditional love, one who carried him in her womb and one who carried him in her heart. He had two fathers who guided him, one who helped him learn to ride a bike, and another who showed him how to fix one. He was a son in two worlds, and in doing so, he became a more complete version of himself. One day, Daniel found himself sitting at a quiet coffee shop, the same kind of place he had first met Michael. He was working on a new design project, and as he sketched, he realized that he was unconsciously drawing a logo inspired by a family tree. It was a simple design, but to him it was a symbol of his journey. It was a reminder that he was not a mystery waiting to be solved, but a story that was finally complete. He thought about the millions of people in the world just like him, people with a question that hums in the background of their lives. He thought about the bravery it takes to seek an answer, and the immense love it takes to provide one. His story was a reminder that you don't have to be a victim of your past. You can be the hero of your own story. And as he finished his design, he knew his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. He had a lifetime of memories to make with two families who had been waiting for him. He had stories to tell, love to give, and a whole new life to live. The silent question had been answered, the mystery solved. He was no longer a question, he was an answer, and all it took was one click. Now that you've heard Daniel's journey, we want to know what you think. If you could give Daniel a score from 0 to 10 for his courage in searching for his origins, what would you give him? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched you, be sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. To make sure you don't miss any of our next emotional stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your journey continues with us.